Hello, once again, young people. Sunday evening, education continues Saturday, Sunday, Monday, it doesn't matter, days don't matter. Learning is a process and learning does not wait for working hours or non working hours. Learning is learning. And for a change, I am actually still today and not moving in a car and speaking um, on a mobile phone. But I thought I should still meet you because tomorrow is the last day and I will miss you, right? And today is going to be a very, very important conversation. Uh, Also, because I feel that these two aspects that we've clubbed together, which is crisis intervention and psychological first aid, also have a lot of relevance. Psychological first aid, which I fundamentally believe should be a part of every possible individual's um, education, irrespective of the background and who we are. The way we talk about primary care, primary health care, safety, we talk about ACLS, BCLS, CPR, everything. I do feel psychological first aid needs to be talked about a lot more in that. Something that we should look into. And the other is crisis intervention. And throughout your career, all of you who will be working as mental health practitioners, you will be doing crisis intervention a lot. Crisis intervention has a different approach, and it's important that you learn the nuances of crisis intervention, how to do it, and the basic difference between conventional psychotherapy and um, crisis intervention. Like yesterday, when I talked about certain special nuances when it comes to sports psychology, where some structures are different because of the nature of the branch that one works in. We'll follow our usual schedule. I mean, I will still be the chai person. The only difference is that today I won't be able to serve chai to our two speakers today. But I have, in Dr. Vasant's case, I will give him a message to remind him to make his own tea. And in Nishna Narula's case, I will kind of send a message to her family that she needs to be treated well and sent chai. And that's the difference between two of these fabulous experts who are going to join me. And yes, I can see some of your questions. And those are questions which are going to be addressed a lot more tomorrow, where a lot of questions and club together assignments that will happen once Vishal and Sachin have talked about the two intriguing aspects that are happening tomorrow, which is neuromodulation and virtual simulation, which will be our last one. And this is our 75-hour internship in the summer of 2024, where you and I have unmuted ourselves, our compassion also, not just our need to learn. And always remember, I know this much, and there is a vast ocean out there that I don't know. No matter who I am, where I am, what stage of career I am at, how many years of experience I have, how many degrees and qualifications I have, I will still know a droplet of an ocean, and the knowledge will be an ocean. So there is no need for narcissism. If you have narcissism, you miss the boat of education. If you are truly educated, the only way is that you humbly understand that there is just going to be tons and tons of that you don't know. So without hesitation, you ask, you learn, you be a student. And that to me is the more integral aspect. Today there will be an assignment, yes, which will be shared towards the end. Let me introduce to you our brilliant speakers. So we have our own Dr. Vasant Reganathan, one of the most well-known names from down south. He's practicing in Chennai. I've now known him for what, over 10, 12 years. How much time passes, his kids were this small and now they're this tall. So life has surely um, uh, moved a lot, and so he's been kind enough to give us his Sunday. Although I have promised the kids that they get a fabulous compensatory fund, whatever they want, because the great grandfather has said so, right? So, and who says no to grandfathers? So that's as far as Dr. Vasant's concerned. He's an academician, has spoken around the world, writes a lot, is well known in media, and he is our most viewed expert on our YouTube channel, where his explanations in Tamil His series is the most watched and has reached more people than in any case, most things I do typically, right? So, and he's going to guide you through this. By training, he's a psychiatrist, and like I said, a fabulous person to work with, a lot to learn from, because for a lot of us who struggle with our narcissisms, Dr. Vasant is an example of what sincere, honest humility is. Dr. Vasant, absolute pleasure.
Thank you, sir. Thank you so much. And I think a very good way of spending a Sunday afternoon, and with interacting with young minds, and with a great, as you said, with Nishta around, it's going to add more knowledge, and I'm here to imbibe as well as impart.
Absolutely. You and I, as psychiatrists, have only to learn from the psychologists, especially when we are talking about these two topics, which are your forte. And now you can meet Nishta Narula. I mean, it's very difficult for me to introduce Nishta Narula without saying fancy Nishta Narula, because like how we talked about the humility of Dr. Vasant, there is the fanciness of Nishta Narula, right? So everything will be absolutely spick and span, almost like the perfect wallpaper that is right behind her, right? So Nishta is a counseling psychologist. She leads our counseling program and also is our program manager. So a lot of things for the for this national mental health program. So a lot of things that you see in terms of the work which we do in terms of awareness, which is crisis intervention and psychological first aid, both in its own way, is essentially driven by Nishta Narula. So what I'm going to do is, rather than taking more of your time, and as you know, I mean, not that you're going to get bored today, but if you do, then you just have to send a message. We need some entertainment, and I'll be back, right? And otherwise, we take chai breaks every 45, 50 minutes. So I have assured our experts today, they must give you the tea, juice, nibu pani breaks that you take every 45, 50 minutes. Feel free to remind them that you need a break, and assignments you will get. The attendance link is already there, and I am now going to leave in absolutely brilliant, fabulous hands of our two speakers who are going to take you on the path of crisis intervention and psychological first aid.
Thank you, sir. That was indeed a very, very warm introduction and welcome. And now we begin with day 14 of our college internship. It's been 13 days of a lot of learning by eminent speakers here. And today we're going to be talking about crisis intervention and psychological first aid, two very important aspects of mental health. And before we begin, we have about 100 odd people here watching, and we will be talking about introducing the concept of crisis. So what is a crisis? What do we understand by the meaning of the word crisis? If everybody can just start typing in their comments in the comment section and give their understanding of the word crisis. Meanwhile, Dr. Vasant, I would like to ask you, what is a crisis in the most ordinary layman language?
Right. See, you had beautifully, introduced that. Sir was talking about how crisis or the psychological first aid that we were talking about. Both these topics, how essential they are in these aspects. And crisis is something that we hear day in and day out, and it is a pervasive thing. It is not limited to a particular area of our living. Crisis can happen in any domain and it can happen in any situation, to an individual, to everybody, as a mass, as a community. So that is why, because of its pervasiveness, and it can strike anybody at any point of time, that is why we should be well prepared to handle it. And that is the importance of dealing with this crisis situation becomes necessary. So it's not only as a mental health professional that we should be aware of how to handle it, but at the same time, I'm sure we'll be discussing on what crisis is, understanding that so that we are able to understand that when we face a crisis amongst ourselves, the ability to identify and point out is, yes, I am going through it, and then seeking help. So it is beneficial both ways, and that how important it is to identify a crisis, which I'm sure you would be talking to us too after we receive the results or the chat box.
Most certainly. So there are a lot of comments coming in here. People are saying it's a short-term, highly stressful event, a situation which needs attention and intervention in order to resolve it and improve our functioning. Any situation, immediate problems, emergencies, a situation that needs immediate intervention, needs a lot of attention, a huge problem. So I think we do have a basic understanding of what a crisis is. As a clinician, as a psychologist, and even in our lifespan, all of us are going to experience a situation where we need to respond to a crisis event, right? The word crisis originates from a 17th century Greek word called crisis with a K, which refers to a judgment or a decision point. So in our history, we've had a lot of such events that have required stalwarts to be making a judgment or a decision point because they were in a crisis situation. They had to immediately intervene. And that is where the word crisis originates from. A situation wherein we need to make a decision or we need to make a judgment. We need to be able to appraise what the situation is doing to us. Kaplan, who is a very well-renowned person in the field of crisis intervention, describes crisis as a state of acute distress, a situation in which there is acute distress and which most often than not results in the fail of one's usual coping mechanisms because they are perceiving the situation as a challenge or a threat. This most often than not also hampers the functional overall well-being of an individual. And in that situation, the individual's psychological balance gets disrupted, which we also call the psychological disequilibrium, which means that a person's coping abilities that they have been using on a day-to-day basis fails because of how distressing a situation that they are finding themselves in. That is what a crisis basically is. Meanwhile, I would also...
I would, I'm very intrigued now. Stress is something that we very commonly hear, when we, a lot of us discuss that we are in a stressful situation or we've been going through a stressful time in our life, and when we meet patients too. So what I would want you to drop in a message in the chat box too. How is stress different from crisis? Or do you think both are the same? Is stress and crisis same? Or are they two different entities that we are looking at?
Would highly urge all the viewers to answer Dr. Vasant's question while Dr. Vasant and I are in conversation about understanding what crisis is and how it's different from stress. So somebody here is saying stress is a response to a crisis. Yes, very well.
Right.
Stress comes when we are in a crisis. Yes. Stress leads to crisis. Okay. Or vice versa. Crisis leads to stress. Stress builds over time, while crisis is instantaneous. Absolutely. Crisis can be for a small time, a short duration. Stress is a feeling, crisis is a situation. Yes. Stress can be prolonged, crisis immediate. Yes. So I think the viewers here do have a bit bit of an understanding about what stress is.
Correct.
Yes, stress is your response to a crisis situation. You are in acute distress. You are feeling that you don't have the ability to be able to cope with the situation at hand. You are experiencing a complete breakdown of your psychological functioning. Common features.
We have a very good receptive audience today, and I'm very glad that many of them are aware and they seem to be in sync with what we are talking about.
I think this is their training of the past 14 days. Absolutely, they are very attentive. Right. So common features that we're going to be discussing of what a crisis situation can look like. So it's a sequence of sudden disturbing events, sudden being a key word here. Nobody is prepared or anticipating a crisis situation. It just happens all of a sudden. It harms the individual and their immediate surroundings. It generally arises at short notice. Like I said, you're not prepared for it. It can happen at the blink of an eye. You are not even aware that you may be entering a crisis situation. It triggers a feeling of fear and threat. It's almost like a challenging situation which is perceived as being fearful. Your autonomic nervous system in that moment goes into a complete fight or flight or freeze, and it leads to sudden changes in mood and eventually withdrawal from normal activities because, like we discussed before, there's a complete psychological disequilibrium that an individual will be experiencing when they are in a crisis situation. So let's discuss what are the few stages of what a crisis situation could look like. So one, it will start with an hazardous event. So any event that disrupts an individual's equilibrium and it initiates a series of actions and reactions. There is no time to respond. It is going to elicit certain reactions that we are not ourselves aware of. It could look like a divorce or a retirement. And at the same time, it could be unanticipated, which would be a sudden loss of a family member or a natural disaster. It leaves the individual experiencing the crisis in a very vulnerable state, which is the second stage of crisis. After the event has taken place, we enter into a state where there's an increase in tension because of their subjective experience of the event, how they are appraising the event, and their interpretation. At the same time, there may also be certain precipitating factors. A lot of you would have heard about what a precipitating factor is in the initial few classes of the internship. The event that converts into a vulnerable state, into a crisis state. So what are the factors that contribute into making sure that the situation at hand becomes a crisis for the individual experiencing it? The fourth stage would be the active crisis state, which is characterized by the disequilibrium. It could be physical and psychological both. A person may be physically injured, harmed, feeling not capable of being able to address the situation at hand. Psychologically, they may be experiencing agitation, they would have disturbed appetite, sleep, concentration gets affected, their decision-making, their problem-solving ability gets impacted, and they may eventually experience symptoms of anxiety or depression. And the fifth stage, which is the resolution stage of a crisis, is where there is a sense of reintegration that takes place, most often than not after the intervention of a mental health professional or any other individual who is there to be able to help. It's the successful restoration of equilibrium post a crisis situation that helps an individual return to their normal state of functioning. Moving on, these are the stages of crisis that most often than not you will see taking place when you are helping an individual going through a crisis situation. Now let's discuss certain types of crisis situation. Dr. Basant?
Yes. So when we talk about crisis, there's a lot of differentiation that we see in the terms of when it happens or from where that it arises. So you can see as the classification, as the slide says, on the origin, from where is the trigger coming from where is the crisis originating, whether it is from the fellow human, whether it is from nature, or whether it is technology induced. Because the third point is something which is going to become more rampant of late, and it is as the technology, we become more and more dependent on technology. We should also be aware that the same thing can also be a reason to precipitate a crisis situation, and we must learn to identify its origin too. So by human, it can be anything, as it says, both intentional and unintentional human activity, however small, trivial it can be. But remember that the personal interaction, the one-to-one, the dynamics that we share amongst the interpersonal relationship itself, that it can trigger a crisis situation in return. So though it can at times, it is the barrier or the network that we have, but that itself can trigger and be a source of the crisis precipitation. By nature, there are a lot of earthquakes, tsunamis, or anything that happens through the fury of nature. That itself can trigger a crisis situation. And usually when it is a nature or natural crisis that we have, we must be aware, or we must keep in mind that we'll be dealing with volume. There'll be many people who've gone. It will be a society or a community at large that would be facing the crisis rather than an individual crisis response. So our approach, which we would be discussing during these the next 3 years, how it was going to be varied and how we should keep in mind when it is individual and when it is a community at large that we deal with. Yes, I think.
So just examples of, let's say, human nature and technology. So I would urge everybody to just type in the comment box, what would your understanding of a human crisis be? And then we'll discuss what are the various forms of crisis situations and how we're able to classify them. This classification not only helps us identify the scale of the crisis situation, but also the approach to be taken in that situation. So somebody says financial, yes. A financial crisis would be a human crisis. Individuals are experiencing crisis situations because of various geopolitical reasons, relationship breaks, yes. Divorce. So intimate partner violence, microaggressions in a family system, interpersonal conflict between two individuals, end of a relationship, loss of an individual by death would be certain examples of a human-based crisis situation. Any other comments? Let's move to nature, biologic, climate-related or geophysical events. A lot of us know that there has been an increase in nature-related crisis situations over the past few years. Research says that between the years of 2000 to 2009, there has been a marked increase in nature-based crisis situations as compared to the 1980s. So natural disasters like earthquakes, volcanic eruptions, wildfires, tsunamis would be examples of nature-related crisis situations. Climate change, global warming, droughts. These would be few examples of what geophysical events and climate-related reasons could lead to. Moving on, the technological crisis situations. So a lot of us in the current day and age that we are in are very dependent on technology. We know that machine learning and artificial intelligence has taken over a lot of human labor. As a result of which, as well as this is a boon, it's also a bane, because there are certain things that happen. So, like for example, data leaks, cyberbullying would be a very major example of a technological crisis situation. There is identity theft. These are few examples of cybercrimes, yes. So all of these examples would be
I
technological
remember,
based.
Trishta, that a couple of years back, when we speak of technology, there was something called as the Blue Whale Challenge.
Yes.
Yes, and believe me that the number of children who've been through that was
Yeah.
very demanding, and it triggered crisis situations in children who had no previous exposure to such. And I think that was the access to technology, the access to that particular challenge was, as you rightly said, it's both a boon and bane. When we had technology being used to provide schooling for children during COVID, the same
Yeah.
technology being utilized for challenges like this, which were very harmful and detrimental. And it was absolutely shocking to see the challenge that they had to do, and many children fortunately were saved from it, from taking a very drastic step. We did lose, unfortunately, a couple of children to that, but the magnitude of how crisis is beyond human nature now, as you rightly said, technology induced is also very important. And this, along with the yes, dark web exposure, correct. I was about to talk to, there's so much happening in the dark web that
Yeah.
many of us, as a psychiatrist, I'm not aware of many things which the child or the adolescent comes and talks to. So
Yeah.
it is that bad, and the exposure, the level of, the negative aspects to which that they are going through, that is something we all need to be aware as mental health professionals and upcoming mental health professionals, because this is going to be a very important part of our clientele. And to understand
Absolutely.
it more than because human and nature causes, we are all very well aware of, we deal it on a one-to-one person basis, but technology is advancing at a very rapid pace that even if you're updated till July, you get outdated because there's something new happening.
Yeah.
So
No,
that's
totally.
how important it is.
Technology, and our history has also seen so many examples of this. While I was making this presentation, I came across the deep water oil rig spill, which caused a lot of deaths, and at the same time, the Chernobyl nuclear crisis that happened in Russia was also, all of these are examples of how technology failures can lead to mass destruction. Now, again, this could be an individual crisis or it could be a group or community crisis, but these would be certain ways of classifying crisis on the basis of origin. Moving on, James and Gilliland were two people who worked on the crisis theories in the last decade and used the applied crisis theory to be able to further categorize crisis situations in 5. I am sorry, this is probably not the file that I was supposed to upload, and there is nothing written after existential, but I'm just still going to explain it for everyone. So we will first begin with development. So developmental crisis is a form of crisis that takes place in our lifespan through infancy, childhood, adolescence, adulthood, and old age. There are various factors which can lead to crisis in the infancy, which could be to do with parenting, it could be to do with the family environment that an infant is raised in. Moving on to the childhood crisis can be looked at from an attachment point of view, can be looked at from their environment at school point of view. Then moving on to adolescence, there's puberty, which is a major phase of crisis for an individual because that's when they are learning much more about themselves. There is identity development, identity formation happening at that time, and can lead to crisis situations through the adolescent phase. Moving on, there's adulthood, wherein people are required to transition from vocational changes, career, finances, family, and there are many other transitions. Then there is also likelihood of divorce, marriage. These could also be crisis situations for an individual. And then moving on to old age, where there is most definitely care of elderly, that can be a crisis situation for the family. At the same time, an individual not being able to adapt with their age-related problems, physical or psychological, and neuroplasticity, which Dr. Vasant will be able to guide us on, when there is degeneration of our brain, and we were predisposed to problems like dementia, Alzheimer's, and that could also be a crisis situation for an individual who is going through their life. Then there is most definitely retirement, or the impact of that for an individual who has worked all their life and not being able to adapt to that transition. So from a developmental point of view, an individual can go through various crisis situations through their lifespan, depending on where they are at. Somebody is talking about the Erikson's theory and the psychosexual theory of Freud. Yes, this is a theoretical base to be able to understand how development can also have many crisis situations through it. Moving, Dr. Vasant, would you want to shed some light on the neuroplasticity and degeneration that happens in the old age, and also from a clinical point of view, discuss the developmental aspects of crisis situations?
Yes. We are blessed with a nervous system that is so great in treating its own self. So as she was talking about neuroplasticity, that is the ability to repair, heal on its own. So look at it like a complex web of nerves. That is our brain. To put it in a very layman term, it is a bundle of wires swashed together. As every day there is wear and tear happening in the brain, and the process of it rewiring, regenerating, and making the connection stronger happens. When this process, when the ability to do this gets weakened, then it becomes a problem. So the ability to heal and to form new synapses, to form new connections, that is neuroplasticity. So as when with dementia, with old age, this ability takes a toll. So when that happens, we are not able to regenerate and recoup as much as how we were able to do earlier. This subsequently, in the long run, as dementia progresses, leads to the very fact of not able to identify ourselves or identify the primary caregivers around us. So that definitely creates a crisis situation. So imagine waking up one day and not, you are aware where you are, but you're not able to recall who you are. What is my name? Where am I? Who are all these people around me? So wouldn't that be a challenge for that particular person? So the main cause of all this is neuroplasticity. Once we lose the ability through age or various other factors, a trauma, an injury, a physical road traffic accident, or any other metabolic ailments that happen in our body with age, when we lose this ability of neuroplasticity, it does trigger a crisis situation in an individual. So that is why, old age, we may say that we have seen it all with maturity, and you become so wiser at old age, and how does a crisis hit you then? But yes, it does when the brain parenchyma itself is taking a toll. Then all what you have learned so far, the defense mechanisms, the way to handle a stressful situations are not available to you.
No, most definitely. And I think this is very important for us as mental health professionals to be able to understand so that we can contextualize when a client comes to us, what stage of crisis are they at? Is it that their developmental stage of life contributing to the thoughts, emotions, feelings, behaviors that they have? So, which is why we're discussing this today. Moving on to the situational crisis. So we need to understand that all of these types of crises that we're talking about have a significant impact on the individual experiencing it. Situational crisis would be completely unusual, unexpected, like we discussed. These are unpredicted events. We don't know they're going to happen. Situations like violence, sexual violence, or suicide, or an accident that takes place out of nowhere would be a situational crisis, a type of crisis situation. Situational crisis could also be, let's say, we hear about all of these shootings in the West. That would be an individual human initiated crisis situation. And we will classify it as a random, sudden, shocking, or like an intense event that can lead to a catastrophe, depending on the casualty. Moving on, existential. I again apologize for not writing anything because this is not the file that was supposed to be uploaded. But existential crisis would be, let's say, defined as, when one questions or considers, starts considering their life's purpose, meaning they are unsure about their values, their responsibilities. Existential crisis is used more offhandedly in our day-to-day conversations, in our day-to-day language. But these may be associated with, let's say, identity development, because an individual is striving to understand who they are relative to, let's say, what kind of a family system that they come from and who they are supposed to be. So we have read Rogers' theory of self. What is their real self? What is their ideal self? The disparity between the two. That is when situations like existential crisis can stem. Moving on, psychiatric crisis. Psychiatric crisis is supposed to be seen from a more clinical point of view. Not everybody that we see around ourselves would, let's say, meet the diagnostic criteria as per the DSM or the ICD, but they will be experiencing certain crisis situations as part of their symptoms or the disorder that they may be going through. Particularly people who have, let's say, personality or anxiety disorders, their symptoms will be interfering with their ability to cope with the crisis effectively. That would be an example of, let's say, a psychiatric crisis. Dr. Basant, if you want to, let's say, talk about dissociation fugue or talking about suicidal ideation as a symptom of a psychiatric disorder and how that could be a psychiatric crisis.
I think, like you rightly said, personality disorders, dissociative disorders fall into this crisis situation. But it might be fascinating to know that even in a psychotic disorder, which is, a hardcore psychiatric issue, when it is, look at schizophrenia or you look at an acute psychotic episode, there too we'll be able to face or a crisis situation can arise.
Yeah.
For example, if I may share one important thing which we had last month, I had received a call from one of the family members saying that the patient is right now standing on the balcony and it is just dangerous, and we don't know what she's doing, and she's been on treatment with the diagnosis of schizophrenia, and apparently she'd stopped the medications. So we had to rush for help and help her through the situation. Why? And looking back at it and understanding as to what led to it was the crisis was precipitated because she was hearing voices. And the voices were commanding her to take that step.
Right.
So when we looked at the other topics of when we crisis theory of development or situational or existential, there we are all aware of the fact of what is happening and why we are in that crisis situation,
Yeah.
and it is very logical. You are in sync with your family members. The family members can empathize, they understand. But when it comes to a psychotic disorder like schizophrenia, where they have a total different rationale, or they are in a parallel mindset, then it becomes all the very difficult for us. So the crisis as such is not the situation alone, but it is also because it comes as a component of a major psychiatric disorder. So
Yeah.
we cannot just do a psychological first aid and intervene at that point of time and leave it. No, because it is part of a psychiatric disorder, we'll have to go further and treat the psychiatric disorder as well. So that is why, as you rightly said, psychiatric thing, though it does not arise individually, it can be a part or a component of the symptoms that the psychiatric disorder precipitates.
Right. And the last, let's say, categorization of crisis situation would be a traumatic crisis situation, something that leads to an acute emotional shock or a temporary feeling of being overwhelmed. This could be any crisis situation that may lead to feelings of trauma post the situation has ended. There was somebody here that spoke about, can breakups lead to PTSD? To answer your question, any crisis situation which is not resolved in a specific duration can result in trauma in the long run. It can eventually take the form of post-traumatic stress disorder. Now, I would want all of you to take about 2 to 3 minutes and discuss examples of crisis situations that you have witnessed in your life, around you, personally, in your family, somebody you know of, and how would you be able to categorize them? I am also going to be discussing few examples of individual crises. Let's say, for example, grieving, suicide, substance abuse, chronic or terminal illness, disability or injury. A group or a community would be experiencing the family crisis, incidents of aggression and violence, divorce, hate crimes, relocation. A lot of people who are immigrating from from their home country to another country might experience a crisis because of their relocation and other forms of discrimination and racism. Financial instability, poverty, unemployment, that could be geopolitical in nature. So all of these could be examples of crisis, but now I would want to read comments from the viewers here who can describe the crisis situations that they have witnessed. Are you able to categorize them in any of these classifications? The death of a loved one, which could be sudden, unexpected, shocking. A bad academic result, something that you were not expecting, unanticipated. Health-related crisis situations, which would be a human crisis, a developmental crisis, because this is not something that we would predict to happen to us. Childhood trauma, resulting in traumatic, post-traumatic stress disorder in individuals who grow up with their childhood trauma not being resolved due to incidents of abuse. Relationship trauma, being in a relationship that is not healthy and being in a situation of crisis in a longitudinal, let's say, relationship. The cross-section of a crisis would be deemed as a crisis situation. So you may be in a relationship that is not maladaptive, not very healthy for you, but incidents that cause interpersonal conflict, which result in a complete breakdown of your coping abilities. You don't know what to do. You are at a loss of decision making abilities. You are not able to react, respond to the situation. You're not able to think clearly, rationally. Would be situations of crisis.
Rightly that you've pointed about relocation. I think this global era that we are in, where we see a lot of people moving in and out of the country and relocating both ways. Uh, the acculturation that we talk about, where the willingness to go, or the process in which we have to go and adapt to the new culture, assimilate it, and behave according to that. That itself will also trigger in a lot of crisis moments, because
Right.
what is something that you do not have not followed, or have a different perspective to it, might not be the right one in that community, or the country that you are going to.
Yeah.
So, as treating professionals, we must be aware of what is the culture from which the patient is coming from as well, because that will give us an insight into how we can deal with the crisis situation, and where and when we should intervene.
Right. Right. No, most definitely. When we experience any form of event or situation in our life, that could potentially be something that we are not equipped to deal with. Our already existing coping strategies are failing. It could be because of, like we discussed, health related, loss of an individual, psychiatric, family crisis, developmental. All of these would fall under a crisis situation. So now that we've discussed and understood what a crisis situation is, now what do we do about it? All of you here are budding psychologists, psychiatrists, mental health professionals who want to be able to understand the human mind, the human psychology. So we also need to understand what to do in a situation when we ourselves or somebody around us is experiencing a crisis situation. What do we do about it? And that's when we talk about crisis intervention. We intervene. We intervene due to our responsibility as a mental health professional to help an individual. Let's discuss what crisis intervention looks like, right? So it's a short term. The keyword here again being short term, very temporary, in the moment management technique, which is designed to reduce the potential permanent damage to an individual affected. What a crisis interventionist, like they call themselves, would do would be ideally to ensure that in that moment they are intervening, providing mental health support to a person who is experiencing intense or unexpected symptoms. They are not ready for this. They don't have the necessary coping strategies. They're not equipped with it. Whatever they have is failing. So in that moment, you enter as a mental health professional, provide very time-based, time-limited intervention with a specific goal. The specific goal being to stabilize the situation. What we are doing is not providing therapy. We are not focusing on therapeutic growth of an individual in that moment. What we are providing is management to just stabilize them in that moment. Common examples, like we've seen, would be suicide prevention telephone hotlines. A lot of us here would know that Fortis runs a 24/7 suicide prevention helpline. What are we doing? People who are calling us, the callers, are experiencing a crisis situation because of multiple reasons in their life. And a psychologist is providing here and now short term management to the caller. That's what we're doing. Hospital-based crisis intervention, what would that be? Somebody has met with an accident. You take them to the emergency triage department. Why do hospitals have the emergency triage department? Because not everybody will first queue in lines, get themselves a room, and then the process starts. Certain crisis situations will need immediate intervention, again being the key word here. Community-based mental health services, for example, volunteering services, NGOs that are mobilizing themselves during a disaster. We have heard of many examples. Let's say, I think in 2018, 2019, there was there were the riots in Delhi. We're based out of Delhi. So there were these riots that had happened, and our team had gone to the camps to provide crisis intervention services to those who had lost their livelihoods, lost people in their family. There was a financial crisis. And at the same time, the riot situation was a crisis situation for people who were experiencing it. In that moment, what we are doing is we are providing mental health support, psychological support to be able to make them feel more equipped to deal with the situation that they are finding themselves in. Right? Dr. Ranganathan, any crisis situation that you have been personally?
Yes, I have personally, and we've done a very good work. There was a cyclone a couple of years back, and it crossed through Tamil Nadu, and it had a lot of negative effect, as in a lot of fields were uprooted, there was water, floods everywhere, and it had led a trail of disaster. Yeah. And it went through, and what happened was the people weren't aware because it changed its track last moment when it was about to cross at a particular point, and everything was planned and things were taken care, assuming that is the path it is going to cross the land. But it has its own course, and it went through a totally different area. So the amount of damage, both in the terms of monetary, physical, loss of property, loss of people, health, everything was very high. So at that time, we as psychiatrists from Tamil Nadu, we formed a team, and as you rightly said, community-based health. So we took in areas along where the damage was there, and we went and we had to do crisis intervention. That was the first step. And the beauty of crisis intervention is it is time bound. It is very time limited. So it is not that you're going to plan a sessions or you will have to have them come over with you and you have to keep repeating. No, because of it being very time limited, we were able to cater to communities or villages together and cover the path through which the cyclone had led its trail of destruction. So that is the beauty of crisis intervention. Because of it being a short-term management, it is very effective. It's like a capsule. It goes, it hits at the right target, you achieve what it is, you stabilize the community, and then you move on. Subsequent to it, the follow-up will always be there because they have realized you have done your part. When the stabilization happens, the people understand what has to be done from then on. So that is why crisis intervention at that moment is very important.
Yes, no, most certainly. I feel crisis intervention, we will be shortly discussing the history of crisis intervention. It's very interesting to understand how over the course of decades, psychologists and mental health professionals realized that we need something for the immediate cross-section of a crisis. There's no use, most definitely people who are experiencing trauma will be coming in for treatment of PTSD, but there is also a chance, there is a probability that if intervention is done at the right time of the crisis, we can prevent a crisis situation to be developing gradually into a PTSD. An example of this would be, let's say, how Dr. Vasant was talking about the cyclone that hit Tamil Nadu, and any person who has, let's say, recently relocated to Tamil Nadu or is only visiting Tamil Nadu and is finding themselves in the midst of that cyclone versus somebody who is living there. Right? Both people in this situation are experiencing the crisis, the equal amount of it. But people who are living there versus somebody who gets crisis intervention in that moment and goes back, let's say, to their home city, home country, there is going to be a marked difference between the two. Crisis intervention is important for both of them in that moment. It's not that somebody who's visiting will not need crisis intervention. They are also a part of the cyclone. And somebody who has lost livelihoods and property and family members would also require it. It's the difference in approach, most definitely. But we can't just, leave the person who is visiting because nahi, ye to wapas ja rahe, so they won't need it. Not like that, right? So we need to be able to look at crisis intervention as that management technique that we're utilizing in the cross section, in the immediate of the crisis. Now, this is a very simplistic way of understanding what crisis intervention would look like. So there is a situation that leads to anxiety. The anxiety leads to a complete breakdown of coping abilities, which would result in a high state of arousal, which prevents an individual from practicing their problem-solving abilities, their decision-making abilities, using adaptive ways of coping. If we let it persist without any intervention, without any help in that moment, it could result in maladaptive ways of further coping and could result in trauma. But at the same time, with intervention by a mental health professional, and if we can help them become more adaptive in their response to the crisis, we'll be able to resolve the crisis situation. If the maladaptive coping persists, it reinforces the crisis experience, leading to more anxiety, leading to a heightened state of arousal, problem solving again breaking down, and the cycle continues and continues. So what is the role of a mental health professional here? Which is to intervene at the right time. What are we doing? We are providing an immediate temporary solution, which is adaptive in nature, which can result in a resolution. Right. Any comments here? We'll move forward. Now, this is a short image. It's a snapshot of clicking again and again. So this is a snapshot of how a human being is in a state of equilibrium. Okay, this is what we've discussed. This is just a summary. A stressful event happens, impacts the state of equilibrium of that individual, which leads to a state of disequilibrium because a stressful event has happened and they don't know how to cope with it. Our goal is to restore the equilibrium state of the individual. That's the goal. So the first 4 boxes are essentially showing the process. Now, there are 2 ways that this can pan out. The first would be, are there any balancing factors present versus one or more balancing factors are absent or there is none present. Now, what is the balancing factor? Who is the balancing factor? there is a realistic perception of the event versus there's a distorted perception of the event. There is adequate situational support. So there are NGOs, there are volunteering services that provide aid to people who are in a crisis situation, physical or psychological in nature. Vis-a-vis no adequate situational support in that moment. Then there are adequate coping mechanisms, no adequate coping mechanisms. The result of this would be, on one hand, there is resolution happening, and on the other hand, the problem stays unresolved. Right? Equilibrium may be regained, the disequilibrium continues. In the state where there are balancing factors present, you are doing something, you are mitigating the crisis situation. Conversely, if the disequilibrium continues, the crisis situation is going to persist. And that is what we need to understand. What are the balancing factors in crisis intervention? Okay, let's move on. Just a short history of crisis intervention that I would just like to shed some light on so that we understand how this started. What happens? So these are like these 5 incidents that happened. So Save a Life League was something that was started in 1906 by this minister of New York City, Warren, who started a volunteering service for people who are experiencing suicidal ideation, the protection of those people. What happened was that there was this lady who had called a New York City hotel and mentioned that I am experiencing suicidal thoughts. And this is post a breakup with a partner. And they couldn't reach out to anybody. And the next morning, this lady was found in a very compromisable state, near death situation. She was saved. But that is when the Save a Life League, which is a volunteering service for people who are experiencing suicidal ideation, was formed. What happened in 1942 is that this nightclub in Boston, the Coconut Grove, was lit on fire. And there were about, I think, some 460 odd people who lost their lives. That is when 2 stalwarts in the field of crisis theories, Dr. Lindenman and Kaplan, who we've spoken about before, they devised the modern day crisis theories. Right? Then the Alcoholic Anonymous, something that we know as AA and NA, which is very pertinent in the field of substance abuse treatment. What is Alcoholic Anonymous? People who have gone through substance abuse and have successfully come out of it meet together. It's a voluntary service. They meet together to be able to mitigate the crisis situations that people are finding themselves in. Similarly, the Vietnam veterans, the Vietnam War and the veterans post-war also formed a group to be able to help those who are finding themselves in crisis situations post the war. Then the women's movement in 1970s was another group of women, coming together to be able to help women go through the crisis that women feel. These are few seminal events that happened in our history, which gave rise to crisis intervention theories. Dr. Vasant, do you want to add?
No, speaking of this crisis intervention, each line, whatever you said, the event which triggered the necessity to create the hotline or to this, it is I'm not boasting about our program, but very much many of people who've come here talk to us about the helpline that the Fortis we run here because of its availability, and it's right at the target. When the crisis happens, they are able to reach out to us and seek a resolution for that particular moment. So in that way, I think with the purpose with which the history that you beautifully explained as to how it happened, we've been following the same, and till date, we are happy and proud that we still stick to the target or to the main principle to which the whole crisis intervention came about.
Yeah, no, most definitely. I think understanding the historical events that gave rise to the need for crisis intervention, there are a lot many more that I haven't covered here, but people realize that there's a need for crisis intervention after the Israeli war in the World War II, the Israeli immigrants, and then there was the Vietnam War, a very major the Hiroshima Nagasaki nuclear attacks. After that, Japan had their own crisis intervention services in place. Because what we need to understand is, I remember watching Chernobyl, the show, and it also very beautifully depicted how there were crisis intervention people, services that were in place after the nuclear attack, like the nuclear leak. And we need to be able to understand that our history is replete with such crisis situations, from earthquakes to volcanic eruptions to wildfires to tsunamis to technological human errors to like even now we know that there are there's something happening in the space, and we have certain astronauts who are stuck, right? Even that is a crisis situation affecting people who are stuck, right? And let's say NASA, for that matter, would be doing crisis intervention to be able to find a resolution. Because what we need to be able to understand is that people who are a part of the crisis situation don't know what to do. They are reliant on people around to provide some support. I see that there are some people who want to break. We can most definitely take a short break. Dr. Vasant, break ready? Yes. Okay. Somebody wants to understand a little more on Alcoholic Anonymous. Dr. Vasant, I'll please ask you to take that from a more clinical point of view.
Um,
And then we can go on a
After the
break.
break or before the break?
Let's answer this first, and then let's do the break. We'll close the history and of crisis intervention.
Right. See, Alcoholic Anonymous is a self-volunteering group where it consists of people who've successfully come out of the substance usage, especially alcohol, as the name goes through. And there are members who've wean them off, maintaining abstinence, and this they form a network of people. They meet frequently at these designated AA places, and they share their experiences as to how they were able to identify the problem, how they are able to mitigate it and come out. So that way is why the Alcohol Anonymous is very important, because it helps each person to understand how the other person dealt with a crisis situation during their journey of de-addiction and rehabilitation.
When do we take a break?
Now,
Right.
people are asking for a break.
Then we take a break. It is 4:08. We'll join back at 4:12:13, which is 4 to 5 minutes. I have told Vasan to make his own tea, and I've arranged for tea to reach Nishta Nerula. Well, those are the standards here that we have. So we'll all join you very soon. Let's all take a short break, young people.
Thank you. Thank you. We'll just be back shortly. It's 4:08. Let's meet at 4:13, 14, 15-ish. We'll start at 4:15. Okay, is the break over? Everyone, give us a thumbs up if you're ready. Dr. Parekh is ready. Oh, I just realized that you guys wanted a break. Long back. Thumbs up, guys. The more thumbs up we have, the earlier we start. Okay.
Before we continue, we'll wind up that Alcoholic Anonymous we were talking about before going to the break. So, as I was telling you, that it is a very good system wherein the whole group is maintained by or run by people who've been through this issue of addiction to alcohol, successfully come out, rehabilitated themselves, and are maintaining sobriety right now. So in that way, each individual is able to relate to the other person because he or she has gone through the same phase, the same crisis situations, or the same journey through the substance and its consequences and the problems that they face through. Not only during the substance usage, but also the other points or life events where during the period of sobriety, how difficult it was, what coping mechanisms they utilized to continue their journey of being abstinent. So in that way, Alcohol Anonymous is a very special group. It's a highly focused group. And when the individual shares about the crisis that he is going through, he seeks inputs and patient listening from the other members as well.
Yeah.
So in that way, it is important, and it is a feature of crisis intervention.
Hope that helps. What interventions can be applied on oneself? We will come to that. We will come to explaining the interventions which can be used in different situations during crisis. So let's move on and understand what would be certain
I think we've lost Nishta over there. So talking about, as she said, the history of crisis intervention. So the next probably we would be discussing would be on the principles of what this whole crisis intervention is based upon. What are the key elements that are required for the crisis intervention to happen? Apologies, the slides, I think when Nishta is back, we would be sharing it appropriately. Till then, let me explain a few terminologies. Oh, wow, good. So, the immediate intervention. So, how immediate it is. So, that is the very important aspect of it, because it has to be at that moment, at that time of crisis. So, it has to be immediate and to the spot. So immediate intervention is one that, oh wow, she's back again. And
I don't know what happened, but I'm really sorry. Yes, Dr. Vasant, you were speaking about immediate intervention. Aap boliye and then I'll continue.
Yes, so she successfully intervened now when I was at crisis and I had to deal with a slide. Right, good. So that was the immediate intervention that we were speaking about, on the necessity of it being immediate, because it is that crisis situation is when that we have to handle it, when the patient is feeling destabilized, when the person is not aware of what this crisis is about, what is its magnitude, and what is happening to himself or herself. So that is why the immediate aspect of intervention is important when we talk about crisis.
Also, something that we need to add here is that when somebody is seeking help during a crisis, that is the time that we need to utilize, only because at that time they are more receptive, they're more amenable to treatment, they will be least defensive, they will not have qualms, they will not have hesitation, because they are the ones who are in need of some support in that moment. So the introspective ability and the receptive aspect of help is going to be at its peak during the crisis situation when somebody is seeking help. And that is where the urgency and the immediate aspect of intervening comes into place. Right? Moving on, action. What does action mean? That in the moment of a crisis, a therapist, a mental health professional, a crisis interventionist participates and has a very directive, proactive approach towards the crisis situation. This is not the time for exploring what is distressing an individual. The distress is very evident. This is not a time to be introspecting about their thoughts, feelings, emotions. This is about providing very directive, immediate, time-bound, proactive solution to the individual in crisis. Right? Then we move on to limited goals. Why are goals in crisis intervention limited? This is not a therapeutic space wherein this is going to go on for a long time and there is space for many goals to be formed and fulfilled. There is very precise goal development that needs to take place in a crisis situation. The goal being restoration of their psychological equilibrium, making sure that a person can return to their normal functioning, ensuring that a person is able to cope with the current situation in a manner which is not harming the self or any other individual around them. Right? Number 4 would be instilling hope. So in a situation of crisis, an individual will mostly experience hopelessness, will not be able to expect or will not be able to understand what could be the future. It will all seem very bleak. And in a situation like that, a mental health professional's role would be to provide hope to a person going through a crisis that it's okay for what is going on and we will be able to come out of it. Providing support. Support is what we're all talking about here. In a crisis situation, also, a lot of times there is a lack of support because everybody who's going through the crisis situation or the individual who's going through a crisis situation is not able to feel the support from their immediate family members, loved ones, or their immediate environment. If this is a group crisis or a community crisis, all the other people around them are also going through a crisis situation. So there is a situation of no support. So for a person who's feeling that lack of support, as a mental health professional, it's our role and responsibility to be able to provide that sense of support. It's a very crucial factor, and that is what we need to be able to remember as the very primary principle of crisis intervention. Moving on, then there is focused problem solving. So again, like we discussed action, here the problem solving ability, the coping strategies that a person is used to employing breaks down. So in that moment, we need to step in and be able to help them figure out alternatives. We need to be able to help them figure solutions and have a more problem-solving approach towards the crisis situation rather than focusing on an emotional aspect of the crisis. Self-image and self-reliance. A lot of times, people who are, let's say, experiencing a crisis will feel inadequate, or will feel that they're inadept to be able to deal with the situation at hand, which is true. But that needs to be mitigated by the mental health professional to be able to help them feel more equipped with dealing the crisis situation by helping them, providing them aid, giving them directive support, and restoring their sense of self-image. A lot of times, the self-esteem of an individual takes a huge hit. So, for example, somebody is experiencing a relationship breakup, or they are experiencing poor grades in academics, or they experience a situation of failure, they experience loss of a loved one. They feel low on confidence to be able to move forward. In a situation of a natural disaster, when somebody has lost their livelihood, they don't have financial means, they have loss of property, they feel they're not confident enough to be able to take care of themselves and people around them. In that situation, we need to be able to step in and give them hope, provide support, instill goals, give immediate intervention, act promptly, and help them build their self-image. Self-reliance. There's also an important, so when there is a mental health professional who is helping an individual, a lot of times there is going to be dependence on the mental health individual. In that moment, it's fine. But we need to also foster independence in the long run, fostering the client's self-reliance. The person who is going through the crisis situation needs to be able to understand that they have the ability to be able to deal with this situation at hand. Hello, Dr. Vasant? I think
yes.
I have a glitch. Yes. Dr. Vasant, would you want to add to this?
True. See, when you were talking about self-image and self-reliance, it is
Yes.
not only that the young adults or adolescents are the ones who face through this crisis, or face through the situation of when there's a negative aspect of their self-image. Many a times when I was reading through the comment section, a lot of you have asked about substance use. In substance use, especially with the partner, and especially when the the spouse bears the brunt of the substance use, any gender, their self-image takes a big hit. We see it day in and day out, wherein many a times they are attributed to the substance use, saying that it is because you are like this is what is happening. So that is why it is important that at that particular junction, though the problem, see, when you look at substance use, the person who has to be treated would be the spouse. But the one who's going through the crisis because of a lack of self-image is the other one, the other partner. So that is why we have to assess how badly the patient's perception about his or her own image in the relationship and about her is what she or he feels is equally important, and to understand the broader picture. Rightly put through. I think they are very self-image and self-reliance are highly pertinent and equally important when it comes to crisis management.
Yes. Somebody is asking why self-reliance is important. So self-reliance in a situation of crisis is important because a person is already experiencing doubt with respect to whether they can deal with it. So you're providing support, yes, but you also need to balance it with their own ability to, you need to restore their ability to be able to deal with the situation. A balance between dependence and independence needs to be instilled by the mental health professionals so as to be able to restore their psychological equilibrium. They are experiencing lack of resources, lack of cognitive psychological resources to be able to deal with that situation, whereas a mental health professional's role is to provide support in the immediate they also need to promote self-reliance so that the individual is able to deal with the repercussions, consequences of the crisis situation in the long run. Right. Okay, going forward, certain do's and don'ts that we need to be able to understand about crisis intervention is that, so we be directive. We are facilitating decision making. We are not telling the individual, please explore your options and then you take a decision as per you. We are facilitating that decision making and helping them make the decision there and then. It is a timely intervention, it's an immediate intervention because we are helping them get out of the situation as soon as possible. We need to be calm. We need to take every attempt, action done by the individual who's experiencing the crisis seriously. We validate, we make them understand that yes, what they're going through is understandable. They are in a crisis situation. So as to they don't experience feelings of judgment, guilt, shame, regret. We are prepared with the resources. This is very, very important. In a crisis situation, if you are providing help to somebody, you also need to have the resources to be able to guide them to after the crisis intervention is over. We make sure that we're not vague. We can't just beat around the bush without any directive advice to give. We are not leaving them with the opportunity, you make your decisions by yourself. You are the master of your own life. In that moment, they are seeking help because they don't have the ability to be able to do it themselves. If ourselves we get anxious, then we will not be able to make the person feel supported, validated. We do not laugh, we do not dismiss any attempts or actions that are being made by the individual. We don't curb their emotional discharge. We need to be able to understand that in a moment of crisis, they are going to have reactions, and that's normal, that's understandable. We don't argue or try to convince them because they're probably not in a state of argument or dealing with an argument in that moment. They are in a crisis situation. What they need is empathy. What they need is listening. What they need is some support, somebody to be able to make them feel that they're protected, they're safe. They're in a crisis situation where their own mental faculties are not supporting them, their own psychological coping strategies are failing, their own ability to be able to problem solve is not effective. So we do not add to their distress by making them feel that they're being judged, by making them feel that they're being stupid, by making them feel that what is happening around you is very normal. No, they are in a crisis situation because it's not normal. So we ensure that we are directive, we're facilitating their decision making, we're calm and composed, we're taking them seriously, we're validating them, we're listening to them, and we are prepared with the resources to be able to link them to later on.
And I think one more important is never compare this crisis to the other crisis that you have faced. Many a times, when the person is talking and seeking validation for what he or she is going through it, we tend to say, what is this? This is nothing compared to, that particular client who I saw, or this particular trauma that has happened. This is after all a flood. I have seen tsunami. Or this is after all an earthquake of magnitude 4.6. I have seen 8.4. No, there is no reason for comparing one particular crisis to another one. That is why never laugh or dismiss the patient's crisis for which he or she comes seeking validation for. Your duty here is to be as calm as possible, to make sure that your body language, the words that you use are empathetic and are comforting for the person who's seeking validation for it. You need not argue or try to, because that is not your job. We are not trying to bring in rationale or trying to change the cognition. That is different. That is a whole sect of cognitive behavior therapy or working at a cognition level. We are not talking about distorted cognition right away. Here we are looking at tiding over a short time this particular crisis. Let us get over this particular phase. Once that is done, by that time, as mental health professionals, you would be able to identify what their defense mechanism is and what is going through. And over the long run, yeah, you could take up and then try to rationale as to what could have been done, what should be done, what is the right way to approach. That is all at a later stage, not at that particular crisis point where the patient has approached you. Because when you argue or try to convince the person who's there in that crisis, you're only pushing him further down. So that should not be your tool that you should take up at that particular time. Your duty there is to listen to him or her with as much as empathy as possible, and provide precise directive solutions to the problem that he's or she's facing.
So what if there's a question, what if the crisis is life-threatening and we have to convince for saving life? So you are hand-holding them in that moment to be able to, like Dr. Vasant said, tide them over that situation of very heightened arousal where their own cognition is breaking down and rendering them completely incapable of thinking logically or rationally. So you need to be able to handhold them and take them out of the situation rather than being like convincing them to do this, to not do this. You are essentially taking decisions for them in that moment. They're coming to you, they're seeking help. If somebody is in a life-threatening situation and you are convincing them to save life, they are coming to you because they want to save their life. They just don't know how to.
Similarly, when you're going through meeting a crisis situation at a community level, be ready to be prepared with all the resources that are available. By that, see, whom they should contact, what should be done. Like there was the Chennai floods that happened. Overnight, there was flooding all over Chennai, and many apartments and houses were completely submerged. So when we go in for this, though it is not your forte, but you should be mindful as to have resources availability as to whom they should talk about when it comes to drinking water availability, the nearest hospital number that they could go through. What are the first things that you could help them out with? Because with those, you will help to alleviate certain fears that have also come in at that particular crisis. Though it is technically not yours, you may say that they have they have to contact the corporation or the government is there to take care. Yes. But when you are the first contact person for that particular person for that crisis, having resources with you available, that will be good for them to help them tide over it.
Another example, Dr. Vasant, that comes to my mind is the COVID wave. And how everybody was sharing resources of, where they can find oxygen cylinders, which hospital has beds, what are the hotline numbers to call. So these were the resources that as mental health professionals also in that moment we had to be equipped with. We need to know about it. So there are most definitely in, like natural disasters, there's an earthquake, and like Dr. Vasant mentioned that where are they getting food from? Where are they getting water from? Where are they getting medical supplies from? In that moment, in the crisis moment, they need that along with somebody to instill hope, somebody to be able to make them feel self-reliant, somebody to be able to make them feel that your goal is to just tide over this. So that would be the difference between, let's say, a crisis intervention and any other form of therapeutic intervention that we're going to be now discussing in the next slide. So what is, let's say, an overall difference between what we know as counseling and crisis intervention? So any other therapeutic technique or therapeutic approach that we employ with a client, with a patient, and crisis intervention as a mental health professional. So we are more directive. A crisis interventionist would be more directive, proactive, and prescriptive, which is something that we don't see in conventional psychotherapy environment. where there is indirect probing, you are not as proactive, it's not as prescriptive. No, you're not advising them, you're not giving them solutions. There's more exploration, introspection, there's more going into the depth of the thoughts, the defense mechanisms, personality traits. So that would be the difference number one. Then dependency is fostered. So in a conventional psychotherapeutic alliance, dependency is not always fostered. But in this situation, that dependency is fostered because they need to be dependent on somebody. They are feeling lost. They are feeling a lack of support. Reassurance is given that you'll be fine. Things will be fine. Active attempts of the therapist to manipulate the environmental factors, which would mean that the mental health professional that is on site to be able to help support the individual going through a crisis will manipulate their environmental factors, which cannot be done in a conventional therapeutic alliance. There's no role that an individual would have, like a mental health professional would have, in the immediate environment of the patient who's coming to you for psychotherapy. Building rapport, very, very important. There's active listening. Complete non-judgmental alliance is fostered. Allow the person to feel heard and validate their felt emotion. You facilitate their decision making. Start the goal-directed behavior. Goal is set. We need to get out of this. You start their goal-directed behavior. You make the person stop. You make them think. You suggest, give alternatives, and you ensure that they do it. Right? Okay, now we're going to discuss some theoretical models of crisis intervention. We're going to be discussing about 4 to 5 models here. There are many, but this is just for a theoretical understanding of how crisis intervention models came into place. We're going to quickly go through this. So the first model, the equilibrium model, was given by Dr. Eric Lindenman and Kaplan. This is usually utilized when one experiences loss. So loss during grief, loss of a loved one. The focus is working through grief and restoring equilibrium, the psychological homeostasis as we call it, the psychological equilibrium. It can last 4 to 6 weeks because somebody has experienced grief, loss of a loved one. They will need about 4 to 6 weeks to tide over the initial phase of shock, the suddenness, the denial. The predominant skills would be conflict management, social skill instruction. The goal is positive growth and reducing the factors that are causing impairment. So it does not prevent PTSD. What we are doing is we are only providing immediate intervention to help them tide over the experience of loss. When we experience sudden loss, there are a lot of people who have a complete shutdown of their cognitive abilities, their occupational abilities, their personal social functioning comes at a complete stop. We need to be able to provide them support in that moment to move forward. The next is the cognitive model, which was given by Roberts and Ottens. Roberts is an individual, again, much like Lindenman and Kaplan, very important in crisis intervention. He gave the 7-stage model. There are 7 stages to crisis intervention. The first would be to plan and conduct a biopsychosocial lethality imminent danger assessment. So a mental health professional who is at the site of a crisis will first conduct a biopsychosocial, from a biological point of view, a psychological point of view, and a social point of view. They will conduct the assessment and assess whether how much is the lethality and the imminent danger. Is somebody's life threatened? Has somebody died? Somebody's family members have passed? Is there any threat to life? Second step would be to make a psychological contact, much like rapport, You establish a collaborative relationship. Then you identify the crisis precipitant, the factors that are precipitating the crisis situation. What are the other factors? So, for example, um, let's say there's a natural disaster, there's an earthquake. So, the earthquake is the hazardous event, like we had discussed. But what are the other factors that are causing the crisis? Loss of livelihood, um, loss of property, no food, no money. These would be the other precipitating factors that are increasing the crisis situation. As per Roberts, then you explore the emotions and thoughts. What are they actually going through? You give them space to speak. What is it that they're feeling? What are the thoughts that are coming to their mind? You sit with them, you generate and explore what are the alternatives. How can they make the situation better? What can they do in that given time frame, in that given period of crisis, to just to move on to, let's say, the next day only. Then you help them restore their functioning and you plan follow-up sessions. This is a very, very important aspect of this particular model, that you plan the follow-up sessions. Because you are fostering dependence, because you are providing support in that moment, it is important for the individual to be able to give them hope that they're going to see you again. Crisis intervention should be learned only by psychological professionals or everyone. So crisis intervention is a therapeutic technique that is done by professionals. Whereas when we talk about psychological first aid, we'll understand psychological first aid can be done by anyone. So crisis intervention will most often than not be, let's say, done by social workers or professionals who are employed with NGOs, volunteering services, and psychologists and psychiatrists. Next, the psychosocial transition model given by Parks, 1971. This particular model was based on the works of Adler and individual psychology. Along with that, it was, I think, also based on Erikson's psychosocial theory. This assesses the internal and the external difficulties, aiding in choosing alternatives and encouraging the use of environmental resources around us in that moment. The focus here is on the client, the person who is experiencing the crisis, and their social systems. Because this is a psychosocial model, we need to be able to understand that this is utilizing both the psychology and the sociology of an individual, bringing it together in a collaborative way, and ensuring that they are able to depend on their immediate support system. This is the most effective after the acute phase of crisis. This particular model is used so as to be able to build or foster a sense of community in the individual who is experiencing crisis. The target here is thought patterns in the internal and external language. So, for example, let's say a lot of people after a crisis situation, come up with questions like, why me? What did I do to deserve this? What did my family do to deserve this? So, even though they may not be the only one in that crisis in that particular moment of time, but they are personalizing the crisis, and it does help to be able to change their internal and external language so that their appraisal of the crisis situation can be more rational. The next is the ACT intervention model, again given by Roberts. This is a 3-stage model, only 3 stages in this particular model. A stands for assessment, C stands for crisis intervention, and T stands for trauma treatment. This was also a model that was the first of its kind to be able to address the clinician self-care, compassion fatigue, and vicarious trauma due to their responsibilities as a mental health professional. This incorporates both psychiatric and psychological triage assessment. So there is a psychiatric assessment and there's a psychological assessment at the same time. We need to also understand that clinician self-care, compassion fatigue, and vicarious trauma is something that most mental health professionals who are working in crisis situations do experience. And this model was the first to be able to address that. The next is the psychological first aid model given by Raphael, 1977. The psychological first aid, which is something that we're going to be talking about at a later stage. This term was coined by Raphael, and he was the first person to coin this term in 1977. This is very similar to Maslow's theory of motivation. and preponderant needs. And so what is prepotent? Like the need in the hierarchy of Maslow's hierarchy model that has the greatest influence. So needs are obviously hierarchical, like we know. And our assessment of the individual who's going through a crisis is based on similar such models of hierarchy, wherein, for example, a person is experiencing a crisis situation, the first thing to be able to do with them is ascertain that their physiological and safety needs are met. Are they hurt? Are they injured? Do they have food? Do they have water? Do they have shelter? Then we move on to their safety needs. Do they have their family around them? Do they have support system? Belonging, self-esteem, and their self-actualization. So and we know that Maslow's hierarchy did get a lot of criticism. So similarly, this model had also gotten a lot of criticism. But at the same time, we need to be able to understand the theoretical underpinnings of crisis intervention. The steps in this particular model are also 7. The first step would be to contact and engage. So you establish a contact with the person in question, you engage with them, very similar to the rapport building, the collaborative relationship that we established that we discussed in the previous model. You establish safety and comfort. You understand that they are safe. Are they safe? Are they not safe? Are they comfortable? Are they in pain? Do they need anything? Then you focus on the stabilization. By meeting their basic needs, you gather information about them. What is their name? Where are they from? What are they going through in this moment? Who is the next person of contact? Then you provide practical assistance in that moment, something that they would need. If somebody needs to be taken to the hospital, you take them to the hospital. Somebody needs to be taken home, you take them home. So what is the practical way of being able to help them stabilize? So you connect them with support systems or other services. In presence of support systems, you connect them to their families. For example, somebody is experiencing suicidal ideation and they are contemplating an attempt. You will establish contact with them. You will establish safety, stabilize them, provide them with the practical assistance, make them contact their next of kin. Or in a situation of a disaster, you connect them to other services, let's say providing any basic aid, first aid in terms of physical health, or let's say food, safety, camps, anything like that. Then you give them coping instructions. So like we were talking, a lot of people are asking, what are the examples of some interventions? These are the examples of interventions that we're giving them. We're giving them some coping instructions. So we're teaching them positive self-talk in that moment. We're making them do some relaxation exercises. We are making them do some deep breathing so that they are able to bring themselves to a state of calm and homeostasis. And then eventually we link them to collaborative services that are present in the crisis situation. So these were 5 models. What we need to understand is that there is going to be a lot of similarities and differences in all of these 5 models. And there are many more. These are models that are given over time. We need to understand, right from 1906, when the Safer Life League was started, up until now in 2017, when Roberts and Gilliland had started working. Through the course of this entire time, decades and decades, almost a century also, these theoretical models have been developed by various people basis the crisis situations prevailing at that time. So there is going to be most definitely a lot of overlap because the crisis intervention techniques are same in all of these models. It's just how we are contextualizing it in a theoretical framework. We have a question here. Can counseling psychologists work in crisis intervention? Absolutely, yes, they can. Is it mandatory to have RCI to work with them? No. If counseling psychology can work, let them know. Let me know different ways to get trained. So crisis intervention is a training. There are various training modules that are available for crisis intervention. I know that during COVID, there were a lot of these universities, Harvard, MIT, were doing online courses in crisis intervention training, training individuals to be able to operate helplines, to be able to provide crisis intervention techniques to people in need. So there are a lot of modules that you can learn, but at the same time, your training as a counseling psychologist will also equip you to be able to deal with crisis situations. But the more we read, the more we are enhancing our knowledge, as Dr. Parekh always says. So, Dr. Vasant, anything to add, and then we move forward?
No, I think the perfectly explained models, and you can always see, with evolution of, as passage of time, how the models have been revised and the priorities have been set aright, and though the undercurrent is the same, I think you would be in the due course, encapsulating all these theories into a single take-home summation. But apart from that, with time we learn more things, how to categorize, the how to what to give priority to, and the hierarchies and the need to hierarchically differentiate. Though you might not agree to the hierarchy, but it is very essential, because as a person who's going to give, when you are there, you should know what is a priority to the person whom you are addressing. So if you are not doing that, then you would probably be addressing something which is not very important to the person himself. So because it is time bound, it is short, the crisis intervention has to be bang on. So only if you are aware of the target, you will be able to summate yourself and deliver within the short span of time.
Very aptly said. So now moving on to techniques of crisis intervention, something that everybody has been asking here. We're going to go through this. We've discussed a lot of these in the previous slides, but just a summary of all the interventions that we've discussed. So first and foremost is appraising the situation for oneself and moving on to building a rapid rapport. Now, this is just not a rapport. This is a rapid rapport. We are being very quick about establishing this rapport. Also to encourage, so a quick rapport is must, like we said, because it is essential to encourage positive transference. Now, if there is somebody who is in a crisis situation and you are able to establish a quick rapport with them, they are more likely to be able to feel positive feelings towards you, and that is going to facilitate the decision making, facilitate the intervention, and facilitate their quick restoration of psychological equilibrium, like we discussed before. They will be able to come back to their normal state of functioning quickly. Second is active listening. You facilitate direct communication with the person, active involvement, guidance, and participation. This is not passive. This is not indirect. There is very proactive effort taken to be able to guide the person, and you participate in conversation. You are there as a part of them. You provide reassurance. Support is a must. Like we discussed, we need to be able to help them find hope. In a state of anxiety, in a state of crisis, they will experience anxiety, and that will result in heightened arousal, like we discussed. So we do very quick management of anxiety by using directive CBT. CBT is something that you guys would have studied about in your previous sessions. You help them in change of thoughts. You help them generate an adaptive belief system, because right now they are experiencing a crisis situation. They will have all sorts of negative thoughts, irrational thoughts in their mind. And you need to be able to help them understand that, no, this thought is wrong. We don't think like this. I understand you're thinking like this, but this is, you offer alternatives, that this is perhaps an alternative that you can think about, which is going to be more adaptive in nature. You make them feel positive, you instill positivity in that moment, you instill hope, optimism in that moment, and you teach them some relaxation exercises to be able to calm themselves down, to be able to bring them to a state of composure. There is active participation. You are involved, you are initiating the process and directing it in a particular direction rather than letting them facilitate it. You're giving examples. You talk about your own example. You help them understand that it's okay, people go through this, depending on what the crisis situation is, of course. It's very important to contextualize it in the moment. We can't, so somebody's experiencing a natural disaster, we can't just basically tell them that, oh, I also had a breakup. No, nothing like that. And you give them real examples of people you have dealt with so that they are able to understand that you're the expert and you know what you're saying. You talk about role models and their attitude to be able to help them understand that yes, there are people around who have also gotten better. You will also be able to feel better. Remind the person of their abilities and positive past experiences, because at a moment like this, it's very important for us to be able to help them restore their decision-making abilities, faith in their own self. You will also be helping them remind themselves of their own uniqueness. You don't let them feel worthless or hopeless in that moment. You're directive in your decision making in the early stages of crisis. You're setting very realistic expectations, and you start goal directed behavior with a very corrective approach. Somebody who's experiencing a crisis situation, we can't obviously make them, we can't establish goals 5 years down the line. No, it won't help. They can't possibly see their life 2 days beyond the crisis situation. So establishing goals for near future would mean, okay, let's figure out how the next hour can be better. Let's figure out how 2 hours from now you can start feeling better. So establishing goals, this is goal-directed behavior. You're establishing very small, limited, time-bound goals in the moment with a very corrective and directive approach. Okay, case study. It's time for some talking, and we'll quickly give about 10 minutes to up to 10 minutes to this case study. So X, a 25-year-old graphic designer, was brought to the emergency room by their friend after they expressed suicidal thoughts and feelings of hopelessness. They had been struggling with depression and anxiety for several months following a breakup with their long-term partner. They had become increasingly withdrawn, was experiencing sleep disturbances, increased alcohol intake, and loss of interest in work and hobbies. On the day of the crisis, X had posted a distressing message on social media prompting their friend to intervene. Questions. What further details in history would you want to have? What would be the steps of intervention? I would request all viewers to put in their thoughts in the chat box based on the 2 questions that have been asked. Let's just explore how, as mental health professionals, as budding psychologists, you may want to be able to address this particular case. Dr. Vasant?
Yes, it seems the case history very fascinating in the sense the crisis was identified through technology. Remember, we were talking about technology earlier. This is one of the positive sides of it. By noticing a message through a social media, a friend has intervened and brought him to the emergency room through the triage. So why this case study was put up is like a summation of all what has been discussed. The ma'am was discussing about triage and how emergency situations will have to. There is a triage that happens, and that is being done. So that is why the emergency room setup has been brought. And since she's expressing ideas of suicidal thoughts, she's given first important, the triage falls into the emergency category. Second was the technology. Third was that we'll discuss as we get into the other aspects on what could have been the possible trigger.
So what further details in history would you want to have? Somebody is saying you would want to know about their previous episodes. Somebody is saying family history, genetic history, about the trigger. Any others? Any more questions? Further details in history could include information about support systems, family, as well as the situations that led to the crisis, that is the breakup. Yes. Okay. Can we have more answers, please? Any other suggestions with respect to what further details in history would you want to have for this particular individual that we're discussing here? Their coping mechanisms. Somebody feels that from the given details, they feel that they may also have been feeling neglected by their family, their environment. Is there any regret, persistence of thoughts? Okay, so remember that this is also a crisis situation. So we need to be able to ask questions that are pertinent to just that crisis.
Sometimes what happens when you try to dig too much into it, and when I read from the messages that you've been saying, that itself can put the patient down as to like what is your relationship with your family members. Or koi nahi tha, you had to put it up on social media, your friends have brought you here, what happened to your family members? See, those are the ways the questions should not be addressed to when it comes to crisis management. As you know, as we were discussing on these steps, it has to be very precise, it has to be very goal directed, and it should pertain to this particular crisis only. How were the past? What were the previous episodes? What is the genetic loading that the patient comes with? All these are for the follow-up sessions which you will be having in the due course of time. Because I'm sure you were all thinking in lines of mood disorder, or are there underlying other issues? There could be, but that is for you to evaluate and treat at the subsequent follow-up session. But what we are looking right now is the crisis management. So pertaining to this particular crisis, what would you want to have is what we need.
Okay, so very interestingly, we don't have details about whether X is hurt or not. I think that would be question number 1, right? We don't know, based on this particular case study and what is written here, are they hurt? Has there been an attempt? Or is this particular thing, this particular situation, a preventive action taken by the friend? So we don't know that. That would be question number 1. Are they in a safe space? Yes. Are they currently feeling safe? Is as a mental health professional, our ability to appraise the situation. Anybody else? Second question could be, what are they currently experiencing in the moment? Yes, we know that they have been experiencing suicidal thoughts and feelings of hopelessness, but what is it that they're currently experiencing while they are in the emergency room, post a message, a distressing message on social media? So after the message, the person lands up in the emergency. What transpired there? Are they still contemplating an attempt?
And also, when you look at the third line, where it says they had become increasingly withdrawn, sleep disturbance, increased alcohol intake, loss of interest in work and hobbies. So, what as a professional, you can understand that the coping mechanism of increased substance use, avoidance, these have all become maladaptive because of remember when we talked about crisis, definition of crisis, we said the coping mechanisms don't seem to function, they have been lost. So his coping mechanism of avoidance, depending on a substance use, all have become dearranged. And
Yes.
this is another indication of it being a crisis.
Yeah.
So that's why it fits. She's carefully
Knowing
put
about
in
the
each
other.
facts because of this. The definition of a crisis is established in the history. So that's why it is. It qualifies to be a crisis per se.
Yeah.
Checking
So
in.
somebody's saying when a person's sleep disorder increase substance use, it shows he's hurt. Yes. Knowing about the other precipitating factors that are affecting them. Absolutely. What are the precipitating factors that we need to know about? What caused them to put up the distressing message? Why on social media? The breakup has happened with a long-term partner. What happened after that? Let's say this person is not in a state to talk or is very guarded, reserved. What then? What do we provide? We provide immediate support and assistance. Yes. How? Somebody said active listening without judgment. Correct. Anything else that you can provide? How do you build rapport with somebody who is contemplating an attempt? Probing. Would they want to be probed? Are you comfortable to talk? Perhaps this could be a question that can be asked in a more, let's say, polite and affirmative manner. Ensure confidentiality, 100%. Expressive therapy. Expressive therapy needs the person to be very receptive. May or may not be the appropriate choice of therapy in that moment, but yes, in the follow-up sessions, definitely. Be prepared with resources, yes. Making them feel comfortable and allowing them to feel safe, okay. All right. Anybody else who wants to say anything about this? Feelings of failure, start talking. Okay. So let me go back to one of the models. Let's say the cognitive model. Now let's use these 7 steps and contextualize these 7 steps to the case study. You plan and conduct an assessment. So first step is to assess the lethality, imminent danger that the person is experiencing. Are they hurt? Are they contemplating something in that moment? You establish a psychological contact and a collaborative relationship. That is your rapport building. Then you are identifying the crisis precipitants. That means you are understanding what could be the reasons for the person to post the distressing message on social media. But he may also need to be able to note that the friend is there. So the friend is going to be immediate support that the person has and will be able to help you understand the situation better. Exploration of emotion and thoughts. Then you start understanding what they're going through. After establishing rapport, after identifying the crisis precipitants, we are trying to understand what they're currently going through. Then you start generating and exploring further alternatives. We understand that this person wants to take their life. What could be the alternatives to what they are experiencing? What are the safety measures they have? In a situation like this, it's very important to also understand something that we know as the counters to suicide. Counters. What are the factors that we can identify that will act as a safety measure for the individual while they are contemplating an attempt? Family, loved ones, future. A lot of times, religion. Yes, we develop a safety plan with them and then we plan follow-up sessions.
And we should know how to address the problem of his breakup or the social isolation that he has put himself into. What are the resources that you could provide him with? You can explore and identify on those areas as well. And like many of you have pointed out, finally, it should be establishing or mobilizing a support network, the safety net. So after crisis intervention is done, remember crisis intervention is time bound. You're sending him back or you're putting him back into the family or his space back then. So when he goes back there, you have to mobilize the support system, be it his family, his friends, whoever he is comfortable with. But remember to mobilize them and hand them over or that person into the safety of that support system.
Yes.
So when we look at the, what this case study highlights, one was the early intervention. So you identified that there was a distressing message and it was expressing a suicidal thought. So it was not a suicidal autopsy, or you're not looking at the patient or the person after the act has been committed. Because of the early intervention or identification, we were able to avert a person from entering into a riskful behavior. So this helps us to identify that early intervention is important. Second, like how we discussed, being empathetic and non-judgmental to all of his problems or solutions that he comes up was again an important aspect in this particular case. The other highlight is we having establishing contacts with the support system, and the care does not end with us or with the mental health professional alone. It is the responsibilities also handed over to his support system, and it is in continuum that the person is feeling safe and it is being taken care of. And it does not end saying, right, fine, bye, tata, it's all done, now you go back and come back a week later. It doesn't. So it continues so that the follow-up sessions also happen. Right.
Okay.
Yes, we were just discussing the case.
Yes. No, I don't know why after every 1 hour, it somehow shuts down. Okay, let's move forward to the second part of our session, which is psychological first aid. Now, what is psychological first aid? Why are we talking about it with relation to crisis intervention? Who can do psychological first aid? What are the components of psychological first aid? So a lot of us will experience that there's a lot of similarity between crisis intervention and psychological first aid, the interventions, but we need to be able to understand that it's essential that psychological first aid is learned as a therapeutic technique by anyone and everyone, just like normal first aid. Yeah. Okay. Everybody again wants break. So We will take a 2-minute break. It's 5:20. We have to wrap up the session at 6. So we will run through this and finish psychological first aid. 2-minute break. Dr. Vasant, let's take a 2-minute break.
Sure.
Somebody is asking this question: if we establish contact with support system, is it not confidentiality break? In that moment, it's not a confidentiality break because depends from crisis to crisis. If this is a natural
in this crisis, the friend has brought him.
Yes.
So the friend is already aware of the distress that he is going through, and the friend becomes a part of that, and it is with the person's consent, because at that crisis, during the intervention with your thing, you are able to make the person understand the necessity for having a social support. So only with his consent, with his thing, you would be divulging it to any further person. But people who already know and brought him there are already well aware of it. So you can always tell them that, see, as you've kept an eye now and we've prevented and averted an episode from happening, please continue to do so and listen patiently to whatever is happening. So you're not breaking the confidentiality because the person is already involved. That's why I said it is through social media. So imagine if he has put it up there, many of his friends would be aware of it, some of whom chose to respond. So you wouldn't be breaking the confidentiality.
Okay, let's begin. We have about 35 minutes for the next segment. So let's discuss what is first aid in general. In the introduction, Dr. Parekh was mentioning there's ACLS, BCLS, CPR, that are measures of first aid. Every car has a first aid box. Every organization, institution has first aid. Why do we need first aid? First aid is essentially an early intervention that addresses immediate concerns and bridges the gap between the need and professional support. So basically, somebody is met with an accident. could be a crisis situation, but they need first aid in that moment too, because the need for professional support, yes, they know they need it, and between getting it, there is some time. That is where crisis intervention, psychological first aid comes in. Now, psychological first aid needs to be understood as an approach to crisis intervention. A lot of us were discussing techniques of crisis intervention. Psychological first aid is that one technique of providing crisis intervention. It's a theoretical framework that equips us to be able to understand how to do crisis intervention. The right action at the right time. So the right time is very important, and the right action is also very important. Right? Moving on. Now let's talk about what psychological first aid is. So we know that there is physical first aid. We understand that if somebody is in the middle of a cardiac episode, or if they are in an accident, we provide them with physical first aid. Psychological first aid would be mental first aid. Inadequate support and lack of resources, like we discussed in the previous sessions, can create a situation of crisis, can cause immense distress, and it gives rise to various physical, behavioral, psychological symptoms. Now, what is psychological first aid? As per WHO, it involves humane, supportive, practical assistance for people who are distressed, while at the same time we maintain their dignity, culture, and abilities. We need to understand this. So, cultural relevance while providing support, respecting the individual while providing support is very, very important when providing psychological first aid, because we are at the end of the day dealing with their thoughts, emotions, and feelings. A lot of cultures have certain prerequisites with respect to clothing, with respect to touch, with respect to the kind of conversation we can make with an individual. We as mental health professionals need to be very culturally competent to be able to deal with crisis situations and using psychological first aid in those moments. What are the aims of psychological first aid? We're going to go through them quickly. A, help people, like we've discussed. We're providing practical care and support. The keyword here being practical. Why? Because we can't just be doing, like we said, explorative work here. Can't leave the individual who is experiencing a crisis with no solution, right? We provide them a safe space, unconditional positive regard, encouraging positive coping strategies, building resilience to be able to bounce back. And this is where we were mentioning self-reliance, self-image, building meaningful, nurturing relationships in that moment, connecting them to support systems, fostering a sense of belief and hope, acknowledging, validating their emotions, and promoting adaptive functioning. So the aim of psychological first aid is going to be very similar to the aim and goals of crisis intervention. Like I said, psychological first aid would be a way of providing crisis intervention. What psychological first aid is not. I think this is a very pertinent way of understanding what we are not doing. Psychological first aid is not something that only professionals can do. So this is one of the major differences between crisis intervention and psychological first aid. Crisis intervention would ideally be done by an individual who is trained, a mental health professional, a social worker. Psychological first aid can be done by anyone and everyone. This is not professional counseling or therapy. This is not psychological debriefing. This is not pressurizing an individual to talk. This is not diagnosing them, labeling them. This is none of the above. We are only helping them. So, for example, the previous case study that we discussed, the friend who brought in X to the emergency, that friend was the one who practiced psychological first aid, because that friend was the one who was able to identify the distress of X, was able to understand that there is need for support. He was able to speak to them, bring them to the emergency. So that is the aspect of guiding them, directing them to resource. As we move forward, like you will understand the models of psychological first aid, X is the one who performed psychological first aid. The friend is the person who performed psychological first aid for X. The friend is not a professional, which is why it's important for all of us to be able to understand, know, have knowledge, training on psychological first aid, so that we are able to provide help to people around us in our day-to-day environment. Moving on, providing psychological first aid. Who all can provide? So colleagues, mentors, teachers, volunteers, family, friends, neighbors, everyone can. There is no condition here, no terms and conditions. One should understand what this is, and one should be able to practice it at the right time. Essential skills would be empathy. Empathy, anyway, is an essential life skill to have, psychological first aid or not. Compassion, anyway, a life skill that one needs to have, crisis or not. Resilience, respect, altruism, patience. All of these essential skills are ones that we need to be able to imbibe and at the same time be able to spread around us. Okay, now developing the right approach. Let's go through this. We understand the situation before helping, so you need to appraise the situation. You respectfully ask questions to understand what you can do. Do they need help? Do they not need help? How you can help? In what way are you needed? Be prepared for the resistance to seek and accept help. Yes, there is a possibility that, so again, now this is a difference. In crisis intervention, somebody is seeking help, they want help. In psychological first aid, you are providing psychological first aid to somebody who may or may not need help. So in the case that we just went through, X could have not wanted that help that the friend was trying to provide. So we need to be able to understand that there will be some resistance, but you still show your willingness to help. You need to be able to provide that availability of support, at least. Be responsive and sensitive. Avoid assumptions, criticism, judgment, none of that. We do not assume the role of a powerful role where we are assuming or criticizing or judging the other person, saying that, you're doing this wrong. Why are you doing this? Not making them feel scrutinized, not making them feel that you are invalidating their emotions. You are listening to them patiently. That's also active listening. Key basic characteristic of counseling, psychological first aid, any form of alliance that you are building with an individual. It is not necessary to talk constantly. At times, just being silent is also good enough. Just being there, making your presence felt is also good enough. And obviously, we ensure confidentiality. Right. Dr. Vasant, would you want to add? No, sir, you're on mute. Sorry.
Right, yeah. Pardon. The thing is, one should be aware that in psychological first aid, any person is fit to do it if you're able to understand what it is. So your responsibility here is not to provide a solution. So don't get overwhelmed. I don't know how to handle it. What am I going to give him? What are the tips that I have to share? How is he going to handle? That is different. You are not doing that. You're like a channel or a connective pathway between the person and the available health resource. So as she was beautifully talking about during the cases thing, the friend was a medium from the crisis to reach the emergency services. He need not talk to him about what all we had discussed. Remember the steps of intervention that we discussed? these need not be done by that person. He need not be aware of these 7 steps of management also. It is his to identify and form a bridge between that person and the health resource.
Yeah. Now, there are 2 models of psychological first aid that are in place. A lot of us would have heard about the look, listen, link, the 3 action principles of psychological first aid. This model was given by WHO, the World Health Organization, divided into 3 things: look, listen, link. What is look? You identify who needs assistance. The first step would be identifying that, okay, this person is in stress. You recognize what are the signs and symptoms. For example, in that case, the friend was able to understand that uploading a distress message on social media is a symptom of distress for X, and they may need support. You pay attention to the details of the event. You understand what is going on. The friend may have known about the breakup. The friend may have known about what X was going through, depressive symptoms, anxiety symptoms. And that's why the friend was able to understand that, okay, this is a situation that I need to intervene in. You assess the need for safety and immediate medical assistance. So what happened was that the friend was able to assess the need for safety and take them to emergency services because they may have felt that this person needs immediate medical assistance. You observe the individual's responses and emotional reactions in that moment. So this particular stage of psychological first aid is just about you looking, you observing, you understanding what's going on. Next, here is where you start intervening. You approach the person in distress. You establish rapport, like we've discussed before. You establish a collaborative relationship. You pay attention to the details that this time around has been shared by the individual. Previously in look, you were paying attention to the details of the environment. In this one, you are paying attention to what the person is saying. You're listening actively without interruptions and judgments. You be patient when the person is sharing. You help them get their immediate needs and you try to give support. Next would be the third stage, which is linking. Now, this is when you establish a sense of connectedness. You connect them to people around them, reunite them with relatives, connect them to support system, you give them social assistance, you make all the relevant information services available to them, and you connect them to a mental health expert if needed. So basically, step number 1 in link would be to establish a sense of connectedness while connecting them to an immediate person. Person not available, relative not available, friend not available, some other service or resource, they not available, and if there's medical assistance or mental health assistance needed, to an expert. Somebody's asking how to help individuals who don't have any support system. You become their support system in that moment because they don't have immediate support system, and through the process of speaking to them, you will understand, is there a friend, is there a relative, is there a distant family member, or if need be, you will link them to an NGO or a volunteering service.
And in the follow-up sessions, you would train them adequately to develop a support system by themselves.
Yes.
Ultimately.
Absolutely. Very important. People who don't have a support system need to be encouraged to create their own support system. And if they are, let's say for whatever reasons, they have a support system in place, but they still feel a lack of support, that is where you intervene and offer alternatives of looking at the situation. Do's in this, so we had a do's and don'ts in crisis intervention, a quick do's and don'ts here. You be willing to understand the situation, you listen patiently, relaxed body language is very important. If we are in a rush, then the person will feel that you're not even interested. You adopt a very empathetic approach. You show some compassion. Compassion lacks in today's time. And the more we are able to foster a sense of compassion, the better we will be able to make our relationships. You offer unconditional positive regard, asking clarifying questions. Somebody here did say probing. So instead of probing a person, it helps to ask clarifying questions, open-ended questions which you may be asking them by paraphrasing what you've understood to be able to generate a better understanding. And respecting their personal boundaries, it, like I was saying, being very culturally sensitive. Some people don't appreciate touch. Some people don't want you to come in their personal space. Some people would want you to come in their personal space. So understanding what their personal boundaries are and not trying to overstep them. Don't jump to conclusions. Like I said, we're not assuming the role of a powerful authority. We're not assuming, we're not judging them, not interrupting them while talking. Somebody is in distress, you are offering your support, and then you are on your phone getting distracted, replying to somebody, this, that. No, making false promises that no, you will get this much money from the government because you're in a crisis situation, or I will be there every day to help you. You may or may not be there. We don't know. We don't know if there is going to be any aid given by services, government services, or let's say disaster relief. We don't know all of these things. So we don't make any false promises that we don't have complete information about. We don't talk about our own troubles in that moment when somebody is going through. Somebody is, sharing their problems with you and you're like, yeah, I'm also stressed about this. They don't want to hear that. You're not offering them psychological first aid to be able to talk about your own problems. We do not pressurize them to talk if they don't want to talk. At times, just sitting there silent is also good enough. The second model is the rapid model for providing psychological first aid. This was given by John Hopkins University, and this model is another similar thing, but it's just a different way of saying the same thing. R stands from reflective listening, A for assessment of needs, P for psychological triage, I intervention, D disposition. What do these 5 things mean? Reflective listening would mean you are understanding, you're seeking to understand, you're showing them the intent that you want to be able to hear what they're saying. You are providing a space where they can share their distress. You're paying attention to their verbal and non-verbal cues, and you are also paying attention to your own verbal and non-verbal cues, which is why it's reflective. You're establishing rapport and you're adopting an empathetic approach. Same thing that we've discussed before, the look, listen, link, but in a different way. Then you assess their needs. Do they need currently, what is their cognitive capacity, their affective expression? Are they able to adapt to social situations? What are their interpersonal resources looking like at the moment? And then you assess their readiness for intervention, which is very, very important. They may not need intervention and you are perhaps imposing an intervention on them. So in the case that we discussed, the friend would have needed to assess whether X wants the intervention or not, whether X wants to be taken to the hospital or not. Psychological triage, you're attending to reactions in the moment, you're prioritizing responses and areas of disruption that need immediate attention. So for example, this person, there is somebody who's hurt or somebody who's very distressed because they've lost a family member. Right? You're prioritizing the response that you need to give in that current situation, rather than talking about something completely random that, I am there for you. They don't need you to be there for them. They need to be able to help themselves feel better with your support. Right? Intervention, you're using different therapeutic interventions that focus on thoughts, feelings associated with the traumatic event. So that's where you're intervening, you're providing alternate options, ways of thinking, you're exploring their thoughts, behaviors, you're asking them what they're feeling, you are instilling hope, positivity, optimism in that moment, you are linking them to resources that are necessary. And then disposition, which is considering supervision and follow-ups. Very, very important. After an individual has experienced a crisis event, we plan follow-up sessions. So this is what, let's say, psychological first aid would be. Psychological first aid can be done by anyone and everyone. We need to be able to understand, train ourselves in learning what the signs and symptoms could be able to understand when to identify, how to identify a person in distress, and what we can do in that moment. Now, this is the last bit before we do another case study, self-care. A lot of times, mental health professionals and individuals who are in the space of providing crisis intervention psychological first aid can experience compassion fatigue, they can experience vicarious trauma, they can experience moments of stress that is building up in their own selves because of the kind of work that they're doing. It's important that we also pay attention to our own needs, our own thoughts. We are reflective and introspective both in terms of how we are feeling. Self-care here would mean that mental health professionals need to also understand that they take out time for themselves, they engage in some positive activities that can de-stress them, help them relax, rejuvenate. They connect with their support systems, with family members, loved ones. They take out time for their hobbies and interests so that they can rejuvenate and restore their own reservoir of, let's say, empathy and non-judgment approach towards others. And they can, at the same time, also be able to feel equipped with the necessary resources to be able to help others with. Self-care would also mean that you are prioritizing your own self in situations. If you feel that you are getting overwhelmed because of the kind of work that is being done, then it would be wise for you to take supervision, for you to be able to speak to a consultant who can guide you through your own distress around providing psychological first aid or crisis intervention to people in need. Moving on, case study 2. We quickly will discuss another case study. The first one that we spoke was of an individual crisis that X was going through. This is a natural crisis. Dr. Vasant?
Yes. So this was on the December 26, 2004, when a devastating tsunami struck the Indian coast, affecting states of Tamil Nadu, Kerala, and Andhra Pradesh. As you're aware that it resulted in a huge amount of people losing their lives, around 10,749 to be precise, when 5,000 missing people, 150,000 of them being displaced from their homes. There was widespread destruction of infrastructure, homes, and livelihoods. So this is a natural disaster that has struck, and the crisis. So what would our crisis intervention model be in this scenario? What would you adopt? And what do you feel is the difference in handling a crisis situation in an individual like Mr. X, and when you're dealing with 150,000 people together at the same time, exposed to the crisis at the same time? So what would be the difference, and what are the steps that you would like to intervene with? You could start by commenting and replying to it, and we take it from there. The crisis might be the same, but the magnitude with which it has occurred is what makes this different. Very good. So triage of the people per se, looking into who needs help the most. Okay. So that is one difference between an individual crisis and a mass crisis situation.
Yes. Absolutely. We need to first understand who needs help. In an individual crisis, we know we're dealing with one particular individual who is going through a crisis situation. But in a mass crisis, most people are experiencing a crisis situation, but understanding, again, like we had discussed in the steps, we are assessing the biopsychosocial aspect of the individual, in question, and at the same time understanding the lethality and imminent danger in that process. Is somebody in extreme need of an intervention, or is somebody so what are their assessment of needs essentially, right? Somebody who needs basic physiology, so who needs to be taken to a hospital, who needs to be given food, who needs to be given shelter, who needs to be given water, who needs some medical first aid, who is crying inconsolably and is not able to respond, is somebody experiencing a trauma shock. So in that moment we need to be able to assess who's experiencing what.
Remember, ma'am was talking about hierarchy. Here again, see, you're looking at loss of human lives, grief, missing people. So there is a question mark: are they alive or not? That displaced individuals. So that gives to property, materialistic, finance. Money is washed away. They don't have cash. Their house is gone. This destruction of property. So livelihoods. If they were surviving on cattle, cattle is gone away. If they are living in a thatched house, there is no more infrastructure. So here, as ma'am was talking about, the importance of it. You cannot go tell the person, see, he's lost his wife, you have just lost your house. No, it does not equate that way. It is different. So it is equally important for us, because each person is coming with a different problem. One is coming with grief, one is the other issues of losing a person's life. So that is why it is different. During the course, you very beautifully put in, the hierarchy that is required for you to understand. If you understand that, you will be able to deliver a good service to this person in that crisis.
Anything else? So I'm seeing this understanding of the situation, assessing the immediate resources. So this is all assessment of need, fulfilling basic needs. Yes. Look, listen, link. Yes. We look first. We understand the situation. Then we start listening, and then we do the linking. Any other comments?
And a very important is when we are talking about the anxiety techniques that we adopt, the deep breathing and all that. Here you can utilize anxiety relieving measures en masse. When you have a whole village, when they are, they are in the community hall, they have taken shelter in a temporary hold. Meet them there. Ask them to give them breathing exercises. Talk to them about how to relax and unwind. So those will also be helpful for you to implement when there are many people together who require your attention at that time.
So like somebody's asking here, what is linking? So what is linking? In that moment when an individual is experiencing a crisis situation, you've assessed the situation, you have observed the symptoms, and you realize that, okay, this person needs help. They need to be helped immediately with respect to the concerns that they're going through, and you need to give them support. Now, linking is you're linking them to support that you are providing. You are the link to the support. You're establishing a sense of connectedness, so you're the link to making them feel that they're connected. You're helping them connect with their immediate family members, distant family members, relatives, friends. You are providing them a social assistance. So you're linking them to someone. Then you're also linking them to services or other sources of assistance that may be available in that moment for the immediate help of people of a crisis situation. And then you are also connecting them to a medical health expert or a mental health expert. That would be linking. So I think this would bring us to the end. We are still on the case study, and if anybody wants to add more aspects about how or what crisis intervention model would you think you would want to use in this particular scenario, and we have discussed how this is different from handling an individual crisis situation. Anybody wants to add in their comments about which crisis intervention model out of the 5 that we discussed would be most beneficial here, or let's say most effective? Anyone? We have to think about a collective solution. Somebody says we use the psychological first aid model. We can also use the psychosocial model of crisis intervention, because we need to understand that in this particular case, this is a social group crisis. This is a community crisis. There's more than one individual. Yes, the equilibrium model also, because most of the people who are in this situation would have experienced a breakdown of their psychological homeostasis, their psychological equilibrium, right? They are in a state where they just can't think. Their coping mechanisms are completely rendered ineffective. So we need to be able to step into, our goal is that we restore their normal functioning. The correct answer is that any crisis intervention model can be used. That would be the correct answer, because essentially we are doing crisis intervention in this situation. But yes, equilibrium model, the psychosocial model would be an appropriate choice, but obviously psychological first aid model and the cognitive model can also be used. We need to understand that there are a lot of models. All of these models have some similarities and certain nuances which make them different. But at the same time, all of them are aiming at a common goal, which is restoring normal functioning for the individual. We also need to understand that a crisis situation becomes a trauma only depending on this. So if a crisis intervention, if a crisis situation is mitigated with speed and resolved, then you are preventing it from becoming a trauma. Most crisis situations can lead to trauma, but it is our responsibility as psychologists, as mental health professionals, to be able to mitigate the impact in the moment. So the right action at the right time. Okay, so I am assuming that all of you have seen these slides almost 14 times now. But I will still, as the program manager of the Fortis National Mental Health Program, want to just reiterate that we have a lot of preventive mental health content on our social media handles: Fortis Mental Health, Instagram, Facebook, Snapchat. You can follow us for content on preventive mental health to understand psychology better. Tips on mental health on our WhatsApp channel and YouTube. And you can stay connected with us through our email and our phone number, where now we can take questions. If an individual needs urgent psychiatric help, can individual? So no, if you are not a doctor by practice, if you are not a psychiatrist or a medical professional, you cannot administer medication. Crisis intervention as a psychologist is only about providing psychological intervention. Crisis intervention do not always prevent trauma or PTSD. It can at times help in reducing the impact of crisis, at times depending on the severity of the crisis. If the crisis is resolved, it can potentially prevent trauma. It depends from crisis to crisis. Psychoeducate your brother who is suffering from depression. If they are not taking their medicines, it would be wise to be able to have conversations, open-ended, empathetic conversations to help them motivate and understand the right course of treatment.
Talk to his doctor who's providing him the necessary, who's taking care of the medication part. Discuss the other alternatives that can be done.
Any further questions? We're at the end of the session. This is our helpline. Since we are talking about crisis intervention, This is the 24/7 stress helpline by Fortis, 83768-04102. This is a suicide prevention helpline, a stress helpline. Anybody can call at any given point of time, and a psychologist will take your call and help with crisis intervention. And with that, unmute yourself, young people, like Dr. Parekh says. But yes, we need to be able to talk. We need to be able to build the discourse around mental health, make it more positive, make it more open, destigmatize, and raise awareness.
Okay, thank you so much, Nishtha ma'am, Dr. Vasant. Thank you so much for the insightful session today. And I'm here to remind you all that we have the last the assignment today, and tomorrow you will all have to submit it by 3 p.m. So all assignment links are going to be closed by tomorrow 3 p.m. Please do submit before that. And thank you everyone for joining. Thank you again, Nishtha Narola and Dr. Vasant. Thank you so much for today's session.
Thank you. Thank you. Hope everybody liked the session. And with this, you all will be able to learn about crisis intervention and psychological first aid in itself being a life skill.
Thank you. I hope the session was educative, informative, and I think the assignment would tell us.
What is this overtime behavior? It's 6:02. All these young people are tired. How much teaching are you going to do? What insightful session. What, yeah. So much education I got. I was listening to all of it. But Nishtha Narula, wow. Both Vasant and I have had an education today. And we as psychiatrists, thank you for educating us. Right, Vasant?
True, true. Every word of what you say is true.
That he's saying to you.
No, please, thank you so much. Thank you. I am.
It's true. It was.
This is your humility, the humility of psychiatrists, and our doctors are mentors.
Okay, young people, tomorrow we meet for one last time in the summer of 2024. Tomorrow is an intriguing session. You have one of the most leading and brilliant minds in neuromodulation speaking to you tomorrow. That's Dr. Sachin Baliga. I've learned a lot from him, and I insist all of you join in. And there's also the one and only Vishal Chabra who will talk about virtual simulation. And as usual, we thank Dr. Vasant Ranganathan to what he's done to his Sunday and to his children. You get whatever you want. It's a blank check just to what you want to do, right? And you encash it and just tell Dr. Vasant, Dr. Parekh said so. End of the story. Grandfather wins, right? And Nishtha Narula, well, what can we say? You continue to inspire us and you continue to guide us. What an honor working with you. Thank you so much. Anuna.bordoloi@fortishealthcare.com will be here tomorrow also, because Anuna.bordoloi@fortishealthcare.com is also going to talk about assignments and everything else. Tomorrow we'll meet for one last time. Young people, go have a Sunday. What are you doing here? Bye.
Bye. Thank you, sir.